Good afternoon. Welcome to the 9th workshop of the second day of the conference, Challenges, Opportunities, and Reflections on ELT. My name is Sarah. I'm a student of the second semester in the English language teaching major in UNAE. I'm responsible for hosting this presentation, and I'm glad to welcome our next speaker who has been a teacher for over 7 years. She was trained in Granada University in Spain in teaching pedagogy field. Nowadays, she's working at San Jose La Salle High School. She's a master's candidate in the Pontificia Universidad Católica in Quito, Ecuador. Erica's research interests are second language acquisition, TVL methodology, teaching online, and communicative language teaching. Today, her workshop will be about TVL online, teaching TVL online. Remember that you can write your questions, comments, or doubts on the comment section, and at the end of the presentation, our speaker will answer your questions. And now, here's our guest. Please welcome Erica Tenesaca.
Thank you for that presentation, Sarah. Thank you so much. Good afternoon with all the audience. This afternoon, it is my pleasure to present to you Teaching TVL Online. I have to tell you that this research paper was carried out in Ecuador. I hope you find this research interesting and you can improve and adapt this experience in your lesson plans. So let's start. I'm Erica Tenesaca, and nowadays work in San Jose La Salle High School in Quito, Ecuador. What are the objectives for this afternoon? I have 3 clear and specific objectives for my presentation. The first one is to describe the effects of online task-based learning on the acquisition of second conditional by third BGU, or well known here in Ecuador, tercero de bachillerato. The next objective is to detail the usefulness of lesson plans based on Willis framework in Ecuadorian setting. And finally, to describe how tasks are able to flourish the communicative skills. Welcome again to you, and I show you what is the plan for this afternoon. I start first to give information about what is TVL approach. Then I continue to explain you how I develop TVL methodology and how I adapt my lesson plan in online environment. And finally, I'm going to explain you communicative skills. That is the plan for this afternoon. So let's start. Okay, so I want to start my presentation with this picture because at the beginning, it makes me happy. But when I find the answer to improve my lesson plan, I consider that result we can change in the future. But it is necessary to have that sense to change. That is the first step to change this result in Ecuador. According to English prophecy made by EF company, showed that Ecuador is in 93rd position of 100 countries in the world. And when I saw that result, some questions come to my mind. For example, does the pandemic situation cause this result? Are my teaching practices old-fashioned? Or maybe do my activities have a lack of input? Or the words of the questions that appears is, are my lesson plans designed in an ambiguous way? Maybe some of you share the same experience like me, because when we saw that result, we feel angry, we feel maybe tired and worried. But guess what? When I saw that result, I want to reach an objective in my professional career. And I rediscover and redesign a new kind of task for online environments. And this information I want to share with you because you consider important, and maybe you can adapt my information to your reality. According to my plan, I start to ask you a question. This is the first step that you have to follow here in this afternoon. As you can see, you have a link. It is menti.com, and you find a code. It is 32 63 52 59. I appreciate a lot to know your opinion, your comment about what is task-based learning. This afternoon is not only to receive information. This afternoon, I want to interact with you. If you don't know, listen before about TBL approach, no worries. You can guess what is the correct option here. So I want to complete this survey. And in menti.com, you find 3 options, and you can choose one of them. Maybe TBL is based on mechanical drills and repetition activities. Or option number 2, TBL means teaching, learning, and assessing with tasks. Or could be the last option, TBL uses games or psychomotor associations in order to introduce linguistic patterns. I give you time to give me your answer. Meanwhile, you are checking and reading the options. I give you more information, more details about what is TBL. And at the end, you can see, okay, this is the correct option. All right. So what is task-based learning? According to Shintani and Natsuko, both authors believe that this approach is used as a tool for doing things, which main aim is not only to foster communication skill, it also aims to assist learners to acquire linguistic features incidentally. The last word has an impact in my career because when I read a lot of articles, books about TBL approach, at the end of my investigation, I understand what means incidentally. And I give you a real example. When you learn Spanish, it occurs naturally, right? Because your father, your mother speaks all the time in the native language. In any moment, you don't listen, your parents say to you, you have to conjugate this verb in present, in past, in future, or you have to follow the structure like this in order to ask something to me. No, right? That is the case here. When you are going to put in practice TBL approach, your activities, your task happens naturally. It's not necessary to say, this is the topic, these are the examples, and this is the paper that you are going to fill out. That is not the case for TBL approach. In the next slide, I continue to give you more details and real examples why it occurs incidentally. Other authors believe that TBL approach has a goal-oriented activity, and it causes the language resources used in order to communicate. And finally, when you are going to use and develop this approach inside your online classes, it helps you to create a comfortable and secure learning atmosphere for learners. As you can see, I highlight different phrases because this is the real results when you designed this TVL approach inside the online mode. So at the end of this presentation of this slide, you have to know what is the correct option, right? What is the task-based learning? Now, if you can give me your answer by the chat in YouTube, it is correct. I appreciate a lot of your participation. Maybe through menti.com or by chat, it is great for me. And I have to tell you, according to the survey, the option number 2, it is the correct description about this approach. But when I mention here the TVL approach, you listen the word task. And I have to tell you something about task. Task is the core of this approach. And tasks have a great relationship with second language acquisition theory. And you say, what happened in that way? It occurs. It is a real result that I find in my investigation. Why? Because when you design a task, you create a mental process in your learners. When you design a correct task, your learners receive an input, manipulate, processing, and share that input, and finally, you have a great output. That is the reason why task and second language acquisition has a strong relationship. And I have here some authors, for example, one of them is Ellie, and she believes that tasks predispose the students to use certain types of language use and mental process. And this is a mental processing that you can see in our students. That is the way that learner's brain works. Our students receive a rich input. In that moment, the mental processing starts. And finally, the result is an amazing output. During my investigation, I check directly all of this process, and I'm pretty sure that it works well in online environments. In the next slide, I provide you real examples, real lesson plans about this investigation and the great and positive impact in my students. So as I say, the TVL approach has the core of tasks. Everything works around the tasks, but what is task? Why I don't mention activity, and instead of that word, I say tasks? Because between activity and tasks has a big difference between them. And I show you different opinions about tasks, and you can see what is the difference. The first author is David Noonan, and he thinks that task involves learners in comprehending, manipulating, producing, and interacting in the target language. And something important that he mentions is the task focus on meaning rather than form. And that phrase impact to me, especially for the meaning rather than form. I consider during my experience and my experience in the high school, in my high school prefer and give a lot of attention to the form rather than meaning. And if I make a mistake, you have to repeat 3, 5, or 10 times the verb or the tense, or maybe the sentence. But here, when we use task, We have to focus on meaning. We have to focus on the information our students are going to share with the rest of the peers. Another author that I want to mention during my investigation is Ellis, and he gives another idea and details about what is task. And he mentions that task is about language used in a real world. And if you want to use task, it is necessary to include the 4 skills: productive, receptive, oral, and written. And additionally, he mentions something about cognitive process. When this author thinks that tasks use a real world, some teachers, including me, we forget that part. Because we design an activity, they have to check the rules. Our students have to complete the blanks with a correct option. And finally, they have to read 1 sentence, right? But where is the context? So when you are going to design tasks, you have to pay attention to this, because all the information that you give through input to your students, maybe they can use in the future. That is the reason why that author believes that when we design a task, it's necessary to consider a real word or real context. And finally, I'm going to explain you what thinks Jane Willis. And she believes that task is a goal-oriented activity in which learners use language to achieve a real outcome. It's not only to read a sentence at the end of the class. It's not only to complete with a correct option. We have to achieve a real outcome. And as an English teacher in Ecuador, the real outcome for my students is to develop the 4 skills, and especially communicative skills. Because inside my classrooms, I have foreign students, and maybe that acknowledge that I improve in English language, they could put in practice in the future. That is the objective that we have as English teachers. All the learning process happens inside the classroom, maybe achieve a real outcome in the future when they travel or when they study abroad. Now, all the information that you listen until here, maybe you have a clear idea what is the difference between task and activity, and what we have to improve in our classrooms. It's not only to say complete sentences, read the page, and nothing else. It should be to improve something else: communicative skills, rich input. And I consider that input is the essential ingredient when we start the learning process in the classrooms. Okay, this is the second part of my plan. Task-based learning methodology. There are some models proposed by different authors, but during my article, I use Willis' framework. And she believes that when we talk about task, we have to relate with task-based syllables. And additionally, we have to include teachers and learners' participation during the lesson. And it is important because it's not only student-centered, it's not only teacher-centered, it's everybody, because we are part of all. And here, I'm going to explain you with real examples how I develop each stage when I use TBL framework. There are three important stages. Number one, pre-task. Next, we have task cycle. And finally, we have language focus. I'm going to explain you one by one, and you can see an idea what I try to share with you in this afternoon. During the pre-task, according to Ellis, believes that she recommends to introduce the topic and activities in order to activate the prior acknowledge. And how you activate the acknowledge? During my investigation, I asked my students, what is Christmas celebration in your country? How do you celebrate Christmas in your house? What are the activities do you usually do in Christmas? Because I must be sure that my students know what is Christmas. Because I have students from different countries. So when my students answer my questions and the rest of the peers listen that information, so they receive input. In that moment, they receive input. Then I show my students a video from YouTube. And the name of the video was Christmas Celebration Around the World. In that part, my students receive more information, different celebrations, because they can see China celebration, they can see France celebration and other countries. And finally, when my students have questions and information from the video, I show them those slides. You can see in my presentation. Those slides mark the input for my students. And I said, I am Ecuadorian and I celebrate Christmas by decorating my house. In the next slide, if I were Japanese, I would celebrate Christmas eating KFC. When my students saw those examples, they have super special to see and identify. And one student asked to me, teacher, why do you use red color? And I said, because I want to show you something interesting. In that moment, my students try to guess why the teacher used that color, why she always refers the information to our context and then compare with other countries. In that moment, I create a curiosity to my students. And I'm sure in that moment that my students are interested in the topic. That is the way how we can start the class. Give to our students a rich input. Remember, input is not only a video. Input could be examples, could be slides, text, and in my case, the colors. Because I activate the knowledge, the prior knowledge of my students. Next stage, task cycle. Here you can see part of my lesson plan. And in this part, I developed 3 important steps: task, planning, and report. And here you can see the task. I give you the instructions that they have to work in groups. In this step, you have to consider the group work because according to the Locarno and TBL approach, believe the learning process occurs in a social context and interaction between adult learners and peers. That is the reason why when I develop my tasks, I try to include this important characteristic, group work. And finally, the teacher's role consists of monitoring and providing feedback. Why monitoring? Because you have to check if your students have questions, if they need help to make the group, or in some cases, they have to change the members of the group. Okay, that is why you have to monitor them. Second step, planning. In this moment, my students are ready to receive clear instructions about what they have to do. The first one is about the students surf on internet and find Christmas celebration around the world. When they finish to check all that information, they have to describe 3 important characteristics about that specific country. And here, if they have to check, they have to read something on the internet, you provide enough time. That's why I give my student 15 minutes. And in this part, the roles teacher is language advisor. You believe me or not, but in this part, my students again ask to me, teacher, we have to use the examples that you used at the beginning with a red color. In that moment was the second question about the slides. And I say, yes, you can use my examples in order to have a clear idea. And you can see this. My input is very important at the very beginning of the class because that input impacts for the rest of the activities in the task. Finally, and it is a great and amazing result. In the second stage, you can see a real result about the use of tasks. In step number 3, that is report, all the students have to present the ideas about Christmas celebration in a specific country. And I try to use here a platform. In my case, I work with Teams platform, and I use the Blackboard. And look at this example. It is amazing. It is a big step for my learners. I start the activity and I say, okay, guys, so we are gonna share the ideas that you find with your group. But I start the activity and I write. You can see the red color here. That was my example. If I were Japanese, I would eat KFC in Christmas night. And guess what? When I use capital letters and when I use red color, all my students copy that pattern, especially the capital letter. And I say, oh my gosh, it was not necessary to mention the second conditional. Any time of the class, I don't mention the second conditional. Only share information about Christmas celebration, and my students find more examples, and all the groups share only one idea here. And you identify some mistakes, but the information is clear. I receive the idea that they want to transmit to me through the Blackboard. As you notice until here, until this stage, it was not necessary to mention that grammar topic in any moment of the class. Finally, to close the last stage, language focus. Here I divided into analysis and practice. Why I say analysis? Because when I start to see the sentences of my students, I give them a gently feedback. And they are very, very happy about that. Excuse me. And they try to work with them and try to improve the activities. And it was incredible because when I give them feedback, they try to improve the mistakes. And the final report was posted in Padlet platform. It was almost the final report. And then when they put here examples why I believe that task develops communicative skills. Because when we use task, it helps to push our learners to use all the language resources in order to produce a real language use freely. Again, the word that impact to me, like incidentally, natural, freely. It's not necessary that learners only complete a sentence. They can give you more information about any topic, and behind of that topic, you have to use a grammar structure or maybe a tense. And it happens here. During my investigation, I tried to use task in order to produce second conditional. And my students do it. But it is necessary to use some friendly platforms to help us to improve that communicative skill. So I want to share with you a real evidence that it is possible. It is possible to improve and engage our students in a communicative way. So could you help me please with video number 1?
I am in Ecuador, and I eat ristiños with honey in Christmas. But if I were Venezuela, I could eat hallacas in Christmas. In Ecuador, at the end of the year, we have the widows. And if I were Venezuela, I could paint the house at the end of the year. In Ecuador, I sing carols in the Christmas manger at midnight. But if I were Venezuela, I could sing carols on the street at Christmas midnight. Thank you, teacher.
Okay, so as you listen, the video, she's Anaí, she's one of my students from Tercero de Bachillerato. And in any moment of the video, you listen about second condition. My students didn't mention anything about grammar topic. The objective of my task is my students give you information. And behind of that information, they can put in practice second condition. When you find different platforms like Flipgrid, it helps to you to include emojis, frames, backgrounds, pictures, and that teenagers like this kind of platforms, and they enjoy to record a video. That is my objective. My students feel comfortable when they do different activities in my online classes. We are going to check the second video. And it is for Kevin Sie. He is a foreign student. And in that video, you can analyze other characteristics produced by tasks. So could you help me please with video number 2?
Hi everybody. My present is to display the Christmas celebration about the difference between Ecuador and France. Number 1. I eat roasted pig in Ecuador in Christmas, but if I were in France, I would eat crepes in Christmas. Number 2. In Ecuador, people eat turkey at Christmas, but if I were in France, I would eat goat at Christmas. Wow! Number 3. In Ecuador, people decorate the Christmas tree with lights. But if I were French, I would decorate Christmas tree with candies. It's interesting. Thank you, teacher. Bye.
Okay, so you can see the video is amazing. For me, it is a big step for my learners because it's not only to give information to the audience, it's only to reflect the confidence in front of a camera. My student, Kevin, used different body language during the video. For example, move hands side by side, maybe to use the fingers in order to show you number 1, number 2, and number 3. And in some cases, you can see he is like make a little dance in front of the video. And finally, my student uses expressions that causes surprising or interesting. For example, the phrase, wow, or maybe it is interesting because he wants to transmit to the rest of the students that he knows something new about this activity, about the topic of Christmas celebration. That is the feelings that my students want to transmit with videos. It's not only to talk about second conditional, it's not only to talk about Christmas celebration. They want to demonstrate that they feel confidence when they are going to give an opinion or comments. And I have to say that oral communication is at the center of all tasks. Because when you follow these steps, you can reach that real outcome. And in this case, oral communication. So when I finish my presentation, I really want to know what is the difference between traditional education and online education. I was a part of traditional education, but along my experience and this pandemic situation helped me to improve my learning environment. At the beginning of my career, I'm honest with you. I use mechanical grammar exercise. I show at the beginning of my class the structure of the grammar, and then my students have to read. But according to my experience, I find here an approach to help me to improve the learning environment for my students. They can actively involve in the tasks. I can stimulate them and motivate them in order to communicate information, clear information. But I don't want to focus on form. I want to focus on meaning because that is a real outcome of my students. So the feelings that I have here is TBL approach and task show flexibility. You can make changes along your lesson. It's not necessary to follow step by step. You can make changes. That is the idea here in this afternoon. Adopt all this approach according to your reality, according to your learner's need. The second finding is that task foster interaction and communication. When you decide to make a group work, the students try to share experience, ideas, comments to design an infographic, maybe find information, interesting information about Christmas celebration in a specific country. That activity creates interaction and communication. And that is the objective of tasks. And finally, when you use tasks, encourage active participation and provide rich input. So when you listen all of this information during my presentation, you can see in the chat a link for Padlet. Let me know, please. Let me know, what do you think about this presentation? It was positive for you? Maybe you use this approach in your lesson plan, or maybe you adapt something according to reality. I really appreciate if you share with me your opinions in Padlet platform. And finally, I have to close my presentation with this quote by Michael Morpurg. It's the teacher that makes the difference, not the classroom. It's the teacher that makes the difference in this pandemic situation. You are the active part of this learning environment. You are the only person to change the results, to change that learning process. And I have to tell you, thank you so much for coming to this workshop. I appreciate a lot of your participation, your comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica, for the great presentation and for sharing your knowledge in task-based learning with us. It was a pleasure to have you with us. So this concludes this 9th workshop and the second day of the conference, Challenges, Opportunities, and Reflections on ELT. Thank you all for attending and for being this time with us. We hope you enjoyed this presentation and all of the presentation in this day. We will see you tomorrow. Thank you.
Bye.